Hope you're all well. Um, in case anybody's not totally sure where Estonia is, I thought I would start off with a map. So if you go just south of Finland there, where this big arrow is pointing, that's Estonia. And as you can see, just south of Finland, with a little bit of sea between there and Helsinki, a lot of birds live in Finland and northern Norway, and even that bit of Russia that's up there. And a heck of a lot of those go south for the winter. So actually, Estonia, as well as being a good place to see mammals like lynx, is also an astonishing place for migration. A lot of stuff flies across that gap, making landfall in Estonia. So I'm going to be mentioning to some extent a bit of the other stuff that we've done as well. It's a bit like Finland to look at. It's got a lot of different habitats. This is almost like what you might call taiga or tiger habitat, with sort of boggy, marshy areas with stunted conifers. It's got a lot of forest, huge amounts of forest actually. A lot of that is, some of it is proper wild forest, some of it more like plantation, looking rather like this. And the other thing is, there's quite a lot. I should have taken more photos of all these fallen trees, because the one thing I have noticed there, different to a lot of the places I see in the UK, is there's a lot of trees, and when they fall down, they just leave them there. We seem to tidy it all up, but it gives it a more sort of wild feel somehow, like it's, and it's going to be great for insects and things that. But you do see a lot of fallen trees and standing dead wood full of woodpecker holes and that kind of stuff. There's huge reed beds, some really large lakes, small lakes, ponds, all sorts of things. These sort of large lakes often have marshes around the edge like this, absolutely fabulous habitats. These wetland meadows right near the coast, got a very nice coastline. So all in all, this wonderful mix of habitats making for a lot of really good resident birds, but also lots of migrants passing through. This is Tallinn. This is the capital of Estonia. And I'm going to come back to mention Tallinn again at the end, because nearly always, whenever we've done trips to Estonia, we've at least had a little bit of time, maybe just a couple of hours, just to have a look around Tallinn a bit before we head home. It's a really beautiful city. I mean, those who know me probably realize I'm not a huge city person, but actually I rather like Tallinn. It's rather beautiful. So we'll come back to that at the end. But in the meantime, um, although the talk is entitled Estonia Lynx, as in Lynx, the animal, which is basically a holiday that we ran for the first time last September, and it's back on the schedule again this year, hoping to get some more people on it. But it's not the first time we've done trips to Estonia. We've done a variety of different trips there. So I thought I would sort of really just mention a few of those as well, in case we ever run them again. And this was the very first trip we ever did, and we did this 2 or 3 times, which was a trip in early April. The aim being to get these guys, which is what we were looking at in that last slide. This is Stella's eider, and Stella's eider is a interesting bird, really. You can see it in Norway, but they winter further south and they come down. Some of them winter off Estonia, and there's a flock of perhaps 300 or so Stella's eiders winter off the coast there. So it was a big target, because it's not an easy bird to see in Europe. And they tend to form these really tight flocks, as you can see in the main picture there. And they're quite astonishing to watch, because unlike most ducks, which just dive when they feel like diving, they all dive together. So one second there's this huge flock of eiders there, and the next second the whole lot have gone. And they stay under for quite a while, and then suddenly they all surface again together. I would love to know what's going on under the surface, because presumably there's a reason they're all swimming down at the same time. I don't know. And then there's lots of other wintering sea ducks there as well, long-tailed ducks and scoters and scorp, and there's divers and grebes and all that sort of stuff, a bit like we get off the Scottish coast in winter. So fantastic for all that. But what I think really impressed me the first time we went to Estonia, I'd got these Stella's eiders in my head, and I knew there might be some woodpeckers and owls and things. But in April, when we ran that holiday, the owls are all calling and setting up territories, and the woodpeckers are all drumming. And so it was actually remarkably easy to see some of these. Tengmalm's owl's hard, because they don't really respond to recordings, where the other two do. But Ural owl and pygmy owl are both quite responsive, and we got very, very good views of those. And then, as I said, the woodpeckers are drumming, and they've got a wonderful selection of woodpeckers in Estonia. Many of the same sort of species they get in Finland, but they're all there, and these they're just fantastic. And they're all drumming. So, when you're in the wood, I remember the local guide. We have great spotted woodpecker all over the place in the UK. So if you hear a woodpecker drumming, it's not too difficult to make a guess as to what it is. Whereas in Estonia, this guy could identify all these different woodpeckers from the way they were drumming, which I was quite impressed by, I must admit, because they do sound horribly similar, actually. So there's the three species there. There's another two here. These two, for me, were the ones I was keen to see. And I would say white-backed woodpecker is probably easier in Estonia than anywhere else I've been. I've seen them in Finland, I've seen them in Hungary and places like this, but they really were not difficult in Estonia, and there seem to be good numbers of them. Three-toed is a bit more tricky, but that's tricky everywhere, so that's perhaps not too surprising. What I would call the woodland grouse, capercaillie and black grouse and hazel hen. All three of these are doing quite well in Estonia. I've been a bit unlucky with capercaillie. All the guides I've ever gone there with have all said, "Oh yes, we've got good chances of capercaillie," and I still haven't seen one yet in Estonia. But they have kind of expressed surprise by the end of the holiday that we've not managed to get one, because apparently they're not normally that difficult. So I think it's just been down to bad luck. Hazel grouse, on the other hand, I saw my first hazel grouse ever in Estonia, and they're really cute. They're a small, quite funny-looking little grouse, really. And the other really odd thing about them is the call. They have this very, very high-pitched sort of beep, 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 sort of all a bit like that. And the local guides have like a tiny little metal whistle that they use to try and coax them in to do an impression, which is quite odd. You think of the growly sort of calls that most grouse make. It seems so completely wrong for that family. It's quite amusing, but they do respond to it, and they will either just call back, or in this case, this one just flew straight at us over our heads and landed right behind where we were stood, which was absolutely brilliant. And there's a bunch of other birds too, obviously. We've got a lot of conifer woods, as I said, so things like crossbills and crested tit are reasonably common in there. Nutcracker's an interesting one. They don't really like solid conifer. They prefer a bit more of a mix. So if you've got, say, some conifers, especially larches and stuff, maybe some birch, maybe some rowan, things like that, all in a nice mix together, that's the best habitat for nutcracker. And we've had some really good views of them over the years in Estonia. Really smashing birds. So that really was some of the real highlights of the things that you might see in an early year trip. And some of those will obviously still be there later in the year. So having done a couple of those trips in April, the local guide was saying to me, "Oh, you really ought to come in the summer or early summer, maybe in May or June, because we have a whole load of breeding birds that arrive that are really interesting for people from the UK." So we decided to run a trip a bit later in the year. And just next few slides are just one or two of the things that we see more in the summer. I was delighted with this little bird. This is a common rose finch, and it was singing up in the trees outside one of the visitor centres. They're not rare there really. They're reasonably common, and they have a lovely little song which, if you want to use a little mnemonic for it, it sounds like they're saying, "Pleased to see you, pleased to see you." It's a really nice little... And they're this lovely red colour. And when it dropped down onto this rock in the middle of all these tulips, I thought, what a great opportunity for a colourful photograph. I think it looks lovely, that. I was very pleased with that shot. And then all these birds here are, again, summer migrants that you could easily expect. Things like red-breasted flycatcher. Obviously, in the UK, we usually see that as an autumn migrant with no red on the throat at all, because it's nearly always young birds that turn up. So to see them with red throats and of course golden orioles, things, it's just some really, really nice birds. And then, as well as these lovely, colourful and exciting looking things, there's a whole bunch of these sorts of things, little brown jobs, but some with the most spectacular songs. I mean, thrush nightingale is really not much different to nightingale to listen to. Beautiful song. Blythe's reed warbler song is bizarre. Really, really interesting mix of all kinds of notes and stuff. Ictream warbler too. I think they've got a very, very interesting song. Really nice to hear. River warbler sounds a bit like grasshopper warbler. So yes, there's a whole bunch of these songsters. Not much to look at, but great to listen to. Some of these huge reed beds are worth watching over. You'll get things like obviously marsh harriers, and there are bitterns there and other bits and pieces, plus the usual things you would expect in a reed bed, reed warblers and things, bearded tit, penduline tit, Savvy's warbler are there, which is a real rarity in the UK. So again, some really good birding to be had. And then we visited some inland, I don't know what to call them, lakes. They weren't very big, but there were lots of them, lots of little pools, really, and some slightly bigger, with a lot of reeds around the edge and a lot of vegetation. And these were a breeding site for citrine wagtail. It's about as far west as citrine wagtail comes. And that's the bird we were kind of targeting there, really. But I just loved all these terns. There was black tern and little gulls, which both nest in Estonia. White-winged black tern, I don't think nests there, but they were passing through in good numbers, and absolutely masses and masses of swifts. It was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then the other final real goodie, most people would go to Poland to see great snipe displaying. There are well-known places there to go, and for a long time, I thought within Europe that was about the only place you could go. So it was actually a bit of a surprise to discover that you could see them in Estonia as well. And so we went to a particular big flat field at dusk, because that's when they display. I am very definitely not claiming this photograph. We some of the well, a lot of the photographs I'm showing you tonight are mine. Others are really from the guides from the company that we use out there. Some of them are exceedingly good photographers. So and obviously they live there, so they get more opportunity. So a lot of these photographs come from there. I can't pretend we had such good views of great snipe as this, but they do this. Hard to describe really. When they're displaying, they kind of hop up in the air and make these interesting sounds and do sort of little flutters. And you're seeing them hopping up out of this long grass quite a bit. And occasionally, once they landed again, you could make out the bird through the grass a little bit. But yeah, it's not as good a view as that, I'm sorry to say, but still very exciting to watch, and really, really nice bird. Moving on to autumn. Now, this is, I'm trying to decide how to word this bit. The Estonia Lynx trip, which I'm mainly wanting to talk about, is in the autumn. It's in September. And it's partly aimed at, as well as looking for some of the mammals like the lynx, we're also seeing some migration in action. Now, I've put these geese pictures in because really we were hoping to see lots and lots of geese. The weather, however, last year in September was glorious. We had really warm temperatures and lots of blue skies, and I think the geese were just not coming in quite yet. So we didn't really see this kind of spectacle, but we did see the first geese arriving for sure. And another year, it could easily be that the geese are already coming in, and we'd be hoping for then big flocks of white-fronted geese, huge flocks of barnacle geese. All of these come down through Estonia, and massive numbers of ducks too. Now, there were quite a lot of ducks when we were there last year, but these include, if you look at that picture there, those are mainly widgeon. There's a few teal in there. You can see the odd bright green patch in a wing or two there. Those are the teal. And I don't know if I can I do that? I don't know whether you can see my arrow. There's also one or two pintail. There's a pintail there. I think that's probably a pintail. So there are a few pintail in that flock as well, maybe even gadwall. So large flocks of ducks for sure, and we certainly saw plenty of ducks when we were there. And these big flocks are followed by raptors. So we were also seeing raptors coming in, and we saw white-tailed eagles every day. I mean, they really were a real feature of the holiday. There's also some waders beginning to pass through it already, and where we had sort of muddy areas, we saw quite a lot of dunlin, a few knot now and again, ring plovers and things. These were some of the better waders. We saw spotted red shank. We saw trying to know if we saw wood sandpiper. I think we did. Certainly rough. So it's a good time of year for seeing some of these migrants. And there are also migrants that pass through that you, as a British bird watcher, you don't tend to think of them as migrants. Things like coal tit, things like tree creepers and song thrushes, blue tits, great tits, yellowhammers, dunnocks, all sorts of things. So there's loads of birds that, because they would have bred up in Finland, and Finland temperatures plummet in the winter to some ridiculously cold temperatures that they can't cope with. A lot of these birds head south and spend the winter further south in the lower countries in Europe. So when they come across from Helsinki, and I can tell you that years ago I did a trip to Helsinki. We did some bird watching around there, and on one of the headlands there's a bird observatory. And whilst we were there, we were witnessing some of these birds leaving and heading south. Whereas in Estonia, you're hoping to see them arriving there. And we did see, migrating little groups of blue tits and things, which was quite crazy. Gold crests can be in ridiculous numbers sometimes. And I popped that long-tailed tit in with it. I don't recall seeing any last year, but it's always a possibility. And if you do see them, then that northern subspecies with no black in the face is the most likely one. And they are so cute, ridiculously cute. So I thought I'd pop that in just in case we get one on the next trip. Spotted this bird from our hotel last year. This is a black redstart. In fact, I think we had 4 or 5 of them on the breakwater there. And all these birds were photographed in on the trip that we did last year. So this is interesting that willow tit. We saw quite a few willow tits, and it's nice to see them doing all right there because obviously in the UK, it's probably one of the highest declining birds we have. It's declined by over 90% since, quite a few years ago, I suppose, but it's still a shocking decline, and nobody's really quite sure yet why that is. The RSPB are looking into it, I think. But there we saw them in various different habitats, including conifer forest, which is interesting because you would never dream of seeing a willow tit in conifer forest in the UK. So quite how that works, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe we need to borrow some of their willow tits and release them in some of our conifer forests so we can boost our willow tit numbers. And again, these different woodpeckers, they are calling a little bit still at this time of year, but they're not really drumming much or anything, so they're a little bit harder to find. But we still managed to see several species of woodpecker, black woodpecker we saw, grey-headed, middle-spotted, and so on. So some good birds to be seen. And I'm not entirely sure whether it was down to the good weather, but there was a lot of insects on the wings still as well. And we could quite sidetracked occasionally by dragonflies and butterflies. I mean, white admiral was a real surprise. Pale clouded yellow and clouded yellow were both there. And that photograph of all those dragonflies on that I think these stones kind of warm up in the sun and then they sort of come and warm up off that. So interestingly, mustached and ruddy darters were more common than common darter. In fact, I'm not 100% sure we even saw a common darter. Mustached being, you might know it as vagrant darter. It can have either name. I prefer mustached because to call something a vagrant when it's where it normally lives seems crazy to me. So I prefer the name mustached because it's obviously not a vagrant everywhere it goes. But yeah, it was quite good fun looking at some of these insects and identifying them. The accommodation's nice. First place we stayed, slightly basic, but it was fine. Nothing wrong with it. It was a perfectly nice hotel right on the seafront. It was well placed. But I really liked this place. This is right at the edge of Matsalu National Park, and it's really, you really are right in the kind of forefront of where the good birding is there. And that tower is important because you can literally just pop up that tower at any time of day. We are staying in the building here. So it's just, you wake up a bit before breakfast, you can pop up the tower and have a scan. And the view from that tower, if you look at that top photograph, that bit of woodwork in the bottom right corner of there is the corner of the top of that tower as you're looking out over these lovely wet meadows and coast. The trees around the building there can attract migrants, and then look in the other direction, again, lots of big coastal meadows and stuff. In that picture, it's hard to tell that it's teeming with birds, but it actually was. There was a lot of birds there. We saw that those are mute and hooper swans in the background. A lot of greylag geese, but we also had a nice flock of bean geese with some of the first real migrants coming through. Quite a lot of ducks. We had quite a few waders there. We did have spotted red shank, green shank, ruff, things like that there. So really smashing place to be based. This was another spot nearby which had a little tower you could view from. And when we first arrived, I thought, oh, well, there's a nice flock of swans over there. So it was a bit of a surprise when I looked through the scope and suddenly realised they were all great white egrets. And we counted them up. There were about 150 of them. Now, I'm sure a few years ago when I used to go to Estonia, there weren't any. So I think they're going through a similar thing to us, that they're really, really moving west now and increasing very, very rapidly in numbers. But 150 was remarkable, I thought. And that's, again, looking from that spot, white-tailed eagle coming into land on some of the rocks out there. We had an otter on those rocks. But white-tailed eagles are reasonably common, and this is the sort of place they really like to perch up. So any time you're near the coast and there are some big boulders out in the sea, it's always worth a quick scan of those rocks to see if there's a white-tailed eagle out there. For me, probably the bird highlight of the lynx trip was really the cranes. I mean, we did see astonishing numbers of common cranes passing through, and they were just brilliant, really. And hearing them and seeing them, and we had them going over at dawn and things like this, and we had them. Oh, my thing stopped working. What's going on? That was very weird. I don't know why that didn't work then. So yes, these cranes were a real highlight for me. I've got a real soft spot for cranes, and particularly the sounds that they make, and just watching them coming in and migrating through, and then going to roost at the end of the day. Some of the places that we were, absolutely wonderful. They're great. However, I can hear you. Well, actually, I can't hear you all saying, "What about the lynx?" because you're all muted. But the mammals in Estonia are actually really interesting. And, the holiday is called Estonia Lynx because that really is the biggest target mammal we were looking for. But these guys are there as well, and a whole bunch of other things. So this is European lynx. I think it's called European lynx. I just call it the lynx. It's actually a different species to the one that you see in Spain. So if you've done one of our Spanish holidays with Julian to go and see Iberian lynx, that's actually a separate species now. And I get the impression that Iberian lynx has, not totally predictable habits. I won't make it sound like it's easy, but they are less nocturnal, let's say, than this lynx, the European lynx, which is really, really tough. And I always imagined it would be an impossible species for me to ever see unless I was enormously, enormously lucky. These sort of photographs taken in daylight are not common. And obviously, the guys who live there all the time, they occasionally see them and get photographs like these. But we were told from the word go that we were unlikely to see one in daylight. So what I need to explain now is how the holiday works in terms of actually seeing some of the mammals. So the birds and stuff we've basically seen during the morning. We quite often have a bit of free time in the afternoon, and I often suggest to people that they use that to catch up on a bit of sleep because they're going to miss out on some sleep at night. These are thermal imaging binoculars, well, a monocular at the bottom, and that is what we use to try and find the lynx. So we're going out at night in the dark, and when you're looking through these, this is the kind of image that you see. So the problem with that, and I'm going to be brutally honest with you here. I don't want to sell this holiday to anybody on without explaining how it works and that it is kind of hard work, but the rewards are good. But those thermal imaging binoculars don't work through glass. So it needs to be somebody with an open window. And in a minibus, the windows at the back don't open. So if you're one of the guests, you're not really scanning around with the thermal imaging binoculars looking for anything. You're sort of waiting for us to find things and then show them to you with a torch. when you're looking through the binoculars, they can have different setups. So you can either have it so that anything that is producing heat will look brilliant white, or you can have them so that things producing heat are jet black. And as you can see there, those things then really stand out from their surroundings. The only slight complication is you don't think about some of the things that might also be giving out heat. So if it's been a sunny day and very hot, the rocks actually warm up. So sometimes you can be driving slowly along and suddenly think, oh, I've got something here in the grass, and it's just a rock that is still giving out some heat after the day. Distant chimneys can catch you out, things like that. It's quite interesting. If you're actually looking at an animal quite close, you can even see which bit of it are emitting the heat. So around its eyes, around its nose, its ears in particular, for example. We saw lots and lots of hares, huge numbers of hares and huge numbers of roe deer. So those are all deer up at the top, the two top right and the main picture. You can see a fox at the bottom right there. That's a very typical outline of a fox. And then the bottom left is actually a woodcock. And we did see a few woodcock, because woodcock tend to roost in the woodlands during the day, and then at night they come out and feed on sort of damp fields. So that was quite interesting seeing them out there, and the odd snipe as well, things like that. So what then happens is, you imagine we're in the vehicle, we're driving around. Actually, I was the one mainly driving. I had a binocular so I could look out my side, and we would pause now and again and have a scan, or just scan as we were going along. And the local guide is looking out the other side. So we're scanning the fields, both sides of the road. If you spot a shape or something interesting and you think, oh, what's that? Then we stop the bus and we have a look. And we can see it through the thermal imaging binoculars. We'll then shine a torch onto it, and that badger there was one of the animals that we saw. So that's purely lit up by a torch. And actually, I noticed Christine Morn was one of the people watching tonight, and this is one of her photographs. She was really a star with her camera, I have to say. My camera couldn't really cope with getting good photographs in such poor light. But if you have a camera where you can really alter the ISO and have a really high ISO, then you can still get a fast enough shutter speed that can cope with the kind of light that you're getting just by shining a torch on it. And well, it's a pretty bright torch, in fairness. But she got some great photographs, and some of the pictures tonight are hers, including this one. Now, you might say, oh, what about the poor animal? You know, there it is, wandering around in the dark, and all of a sudden this brilliant torch is blasted straight at it. How's it going to cope with that? But I find it absolutely baffling, because I've done a lot of night drives now in different countries, and it genuinely doesn't seem to bother the animals very much at all. So this badger was actually running away from us. So it could have just carried on running. We put the torch on it, and it stopped and turned around and had a look at us. And it stayed there a little while and then bumbled off. You know, it didn't seem particularly bothered about having a bright torch shone on it. I spotted foxes. We put the torch on those. They just sit there, carry on looking around as if nothing's changed. Really odd. I can't help thinking, if somebody did that to me at night, I'd find it horrible. But they don't seem to even bat an eyelid at it. It's really quite strange. I can't make sense of it, if I'm honest, but it is how it is. And I'm very grateful that it is like that, because it means I don't feel too bad about doing it. This owl, this was taken in September on the trip, and we spotted it land on a fence post further along the road, and it just stayed on the fence post. And of course, after we'd had a little look at it from a distance, we thought, well, we're driving that way. We'll just drive very slowly, and at some point it's going to take off, isn't it? So by the time we took this photograph, it was right beside the vehicle. I mean, this is a fence line at the edge of the road, and we're on the road. It was that close. And that's how bothered it was about us being there. It just carried on looking around. Absolutely astonishing. What a great view along the Owl. Same with nightjars. And it's interesting that we were seeing quite a lot of nightjars, which was a real treat. I haven't seen nightjar for quite a while. And we saw a lot of them, and particular roads seemed to be better than others. and they would flit around in front of the vehicle and quite often land on the road, and you'd have to stop because you're going to run them over. I mean, it was ridiculous. And you could literally get out and take a photograph like this. But I think they're purely relying on camouflage. I think they believe you can't see them. But if you make it obvious that you can see them, they just fly off. They're not, it's not like they're so dazzled they can't do it. So quite remarkable. And what a bird, eh? I mean, the beautiful markings in the wings on that thing. Just lovely to see. I don't know whether I could promise if we do, well, assuming we do the trip this September, I can't promise we'll definitely see nightjar because the local guy was a little bit surprised that we were seeing so many. He was putting that down to this long spell of warm weather into September that was unusual. So I guess there were still plenty of insects, and the nightjars felt no great need to move on yet. So we were still seeing a lot of them, which was just wonderful, actually. This is another of Christine's photographs. If you knew how dark it was when this photo was taken, you'd be astonished. This is a Ural owl. And we drove through a territory of a pair of Ural owls. And I'll be honest, we tried playing a little bit of the call, and it flew in and landed in the tree a little way away, just kind of watching us. Looked good through the scope, but I must admit, it never even occurred to me to attempt to take a photograph. And when I saw what Christine had achieved with her camera, I was amazed. It almost looks like daylight, but it was really quite dark by then. But fabulous bird. This is a big owl, by the way. I mean, it's related to tawny owl, same group, but it's twice the size probably. It's an enormous beast. So coming back to looking for the mammals, we're driving around with these thermal imaging binoculars and things. What was quite nice. I mean, I don't want you to think that if you were sat in the back, you're getting bored, because I don't think people did at all. The impression I get is that as we're driving around, okay, they can't spot much for themselves, but we're spotting a lot of stuff and putting torches on it and stuff. I mean, looking for a lot more than just hares and roe deer. This is one of the animals that we kind of hope to see, although it's an introduced thing. So I suppose if somebody came to Britain and spotted a mink, it would be a similar kind of thing, I suppose. You might be excited to see it, but there's a slight something about seeing them, I suppose. But this is a raccoon dog, and it is a dog. It's really short legs. They look very funny when they run because they kind of trot along with these tiny little legs going very fast. They were introduced really to the area in farms. They used to farm them for their fur. These are an Asian species from much, much further east. Same story with mink, I suppose, in the UK. They were farmed for their fur, and then they escape, and then they breed in the wild. Same happened with these, and these now breed in the wild in a lot of countries, including Estonia, including Finland, including a lot of the other ones in the same area. And they're in really big numbers now, thousands of them. So this is, raccoon dog, for named because of those markings on its face, really. But I don't know, I rather like them. And we saw quite a few of these in the torch, or crossing the road in front of the vehicle or whatever, and also at a hide that we went to later on, which I'll come to at the end. Not taken on the holiday because we didn't get any views in daylight, but wild boar are all actually quite common in Estonia. I have in the past, on some of the trips we've done, actually bumped into little groups of wild boars in daylight. The only ones we saw probably about 3 or so groups of wild boar, very distant, but they're certainly there, and you've got a good chance of seeing them. And then the other animal we were keen to see was, well, in Europe we call it an elk. In America they call it a moose. But in America they have another animal they call an elk, so that causes huge confusion. So I tend these days to refer to this as moose, and then everybody knows what we're talking about. But if you look it up in a European mammal book, it won't be called that. I got the impression from the local guy that we were expecting to see quite a lot of these, and actually it was like our 5th day before we spotted one, and I think the local guy was beginning to think we weren't going to. He was really surprised how long it took us to see one, and then once we'd seen our first one, I think we saw about another 4 or 5. So and they're amazing animals. They're really big, really, really big, very, very long legs. Again, not photos from the trip we did last year, but just photos I've taken previously or have borrowed. from the company. But they're really, really impressive animals. And those white legs can sometimes stand out from a darker background. Despite being so big, they can be quite well camouflaged. And sometimes it's the white legs that you notice first. And they are really, really huge. I would say not far off the size of a horse, really, or so, with his really long nose. The males have those antlers. And we did see one really big male on the very last morning, which was fabulous. That's the boy. That's what the trip is all about. And we were really, 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 really hoping to see a lynx. And I'm right. I'm going to be totally honest with you here. We spoke about this on the first evening, and he said the local guy was saying that they've done some calculations recently about how easy it was to see a lynx, and he said that they nearly always see one. Pretty much every trip they've run of the type that we do, they have seen lynx. Sometimes really quickly, other times taking a very long time, and these are photographs that are taken by that company on other trips than ours. Again, in torchlight. The top right shows what lynx look like through a thermal imaging pair of binoculars. They're an odd shape. They've got fairly short legs for the size of the body and no tail really at all, but quite a thick neck. So they kind of very, very distinctive shape. There were 2 or 3 times we stopped because I thought I'd found one that was posing like a cat. You know the way a cat will sometimes sit very upright with its legs straight down on the front and sort of sitting on its backside. And then we'd put the torch on it and realised it was a fox sitting in just the same pose that a cat will often take, especially on top of a rock, which is the kind of thing lynx like to do. He said that if they worked out how many hours they put into looking for a lynx on average before they see one. So I'm saying on average because it obviously varies from more than that to considerably less. Sometimes they see it on the first outing within the first hour, but other times really, really struggle. He said it was about 14 hours of searching on average for a lynx. And I was thinking, crikey almighty, that's a lot of driving around and looking. And I was a bit worried that we were going to get bored. But you think about all those things I was just saying. We saw badgers, we saw foxes, we saw hundreds literally of brown hares, lots of roe deer. We saw raccoon dogs, we saw wild boar, all this stuff. So actually, I felt like the time passed incredibly quickly. And when we finally got this beauty, it had taken us 16 hours, which sounds horrific, but actually, personally, obviously it'd be interesting to know what the people in the group thought. That I felt like they felt the same as me. It didn't feel like 16 hours. It felt like we'd had a great time. And also it's just wonderful being out there at night. You know, we were finding roosting birds, we were finding all sorts of odd things. We even had a beaver at one point very briefly. And the sunsets and the beautiful moonshine through the mist and things like this. It was really, really lovely. However, we were driving along at one point and the local guide suddenly said, "Oh, can you stop? Can you stop?" So I pulled the car to a stop and he said, "This looks interesting." And there was something about the way he said it. I just thought, he's got one. He's got one. And then I hardly dare think it because by now I was kind of like, I was really, really keen to see one of these things. I never thought I would. And then he said, "Right, everybody get your binoculars ready because I'm going to put the torch on it." And I thought, he really has got one. And he popped his torch on and bang, there it was. What an amazing animal. I mean, they're quite big, very beautiful. That face, he didn't even get up for quite a while. He just stayed like that watching us, didn't seem particularly worried. Apparently, very often they don't run, they just wander. You know, he says they don't necessarily seem at all bothered by the torch. This one just sat for quite a long time. Um, Again, thank you ever so much to Christine for this photograph. My photographs were dreadful. I've got a fairly cheap camera really, and I can't get the ISO levels that she can set on hers, which makes a huge difference. So my shutter speeds are very slow, and mine were just a blur. But her photograph I thought was wonderful, and I had this as a screensaver on my computer for a very long time. I was so thrilled. Well, we all were, I think. It was just a beautiful thing to see. And eventually he kind of got up and just kind of wandered away, ran away a little bit and then wandered a bit and headed off towards some trees. But oh, I was just elated. It was one of those wonderful moments. So I still feel pretty confident if you did the trip, you'd see one. As I say, he said average 14 hours, we took 16. He said there was one trip you did where they saw one in the first hour. So you just never know your luck. I do remember years ago going out there to do a bird watching trip, and the guide said the previous bird watching trip, they were driving from the airport to the first hotel, and one had crossed the road in front of the car. They hadn't even arrived at the first hotel yet. So you never know your luck. But certainly, this method using the thermal imaging binoculars really does work, and they're having a lot of success. So I'm reasonably confident that we'd get one again if we go in September. So isn't that just a beautiful animal? And this is another spot we went to. Really, I should have finished the talk with that, but just wanted to say, but we got one. And here is a rather beautiful spot that we went to. It's a meadow right out in the forest. We'd just seen that Ural owl actually, and we were heading out to this spot, which is right in the middle of a wolf territory. Again, wolves are they're not that rare. They're not common by any means, but they're not that rare in Estonia. But they like the forest, and they are really, really, really hard to spot. And we were told, under no uncertainty, not to expect to see one at all. Our chances of actually seeing a wolf are minuscule, apparently. However, we were quite excited about the thought of hearing one. So we went to this spot here, and we quietly got out of the vehicle, and it was the most beautiful end to the day, and the moon was coming up, and this is, that photograph on the right. Obviously, the people that live there just do see the odd one coming down a track or something. We saw droppings, right at the bottom left there, and we saw footprints. And then at that spot I was just showing you, we actually got out, and having settled quietly, the local guy then played a little bit of wolf howling over a loudspeaker. And they responded. We got this amazing moment where everybody got to hear howling wolves. Really spine-tingling stuff. It really was, and especially with the night as it was, in the dark, almost as moon up and mist, and having that coming through the trees was just remarkable. And then we could also hear they got a family of young ones at the time, and you could hear these young ones. They were obviously playing or mucking about or something. You could hear these little yipping sort of calls as well. Would have been lovely to see one, but at the end of the day, it was almost as good. It really was very special. And then I'm going to finish with this. This is well, we spent a night in a box basically. It's a hide where they put bait out for bears, and Estonia has quite a reasonable population of bears, particularly in one part of the country. They're a very comfortable hide, actually. You can see the seats at the top there, and behind those seats, if I move on to the next slide, you can see there are bunk beds. It's obviously would be ridiculous to go into a hide and then at night when it's now virtually pitch black to try and walk back to the vehicle when there's a load of bears being called in. So the thing you do is you actually stay overnight in the hide, which is a real experience. I loved it. And you're looking out through those slats there, that green mesh you can lift out of the way. And it was just smashing. You could when we first arrived, it was daylight. So I was surprised how early we got there. We were there by about 4-ish, I suppose. And there's a bird feeder in front of the hide, which was smashing because that was pulling in a few things. There was crested tit, as you can see there. More willow tits. There was marsh tit as well. So it was a nice opportunity to compare those. And the nuthatches there have completely white undersides. It's a continental subspecies of nuthatch. Really smart, actually. When you're used to seeing ours, it was nice to see these different ones that are so clean looking. There were jays coming in. We also had a red squirrel. And then we had this cute little raccoon dog. This is I'm assuming a very young animal. He was quite small and he looked really scruffy and he was limping. So we wondered if he'd actually been hit by a car or something or attacked by something. But he seemed to be doing all right. He was, walking through there and obviously the hide has bait put out in front of it for the bears. And a raccoon dog is a very opportunistic animal, so it won't just eat meat; it will happily eat whatever's been put out for the bears as well, I think. So it's probably in a very sensible place. It's very sweet. We call him Limpy. But whoa, that was what we came for. And oh, what an evening we had. The bottom left shows the sort of what appeared after remarkably short time, actually, still broad daylight. And this mother bear comes in with two very well-grown cubs. And honestly, what a photo opportunity it is. It really was wonderful. They are just the most fabulous animals. If you like badger watching, this is like badger watching on steroids, really. It's the most incredible thing to see. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. It really was a fabulous thing to do. And we saw a mother with two cubs. They stayed for a while. They then wandered off. And after a while, we thought, oh, they've come back, but the other side of the hide. We've got actually windows looking out both directions. And there was a mother with two cubs the other side of the hide. And we thought, oh, they're back. And I was kind of looking at one of the young ones thinking that was really pale on its shoulders. I don't remember either of the other two being like that, at which point somebody said, oh no, the original one's back on this side. And we actually had 6 bears in view at the same time, 2 mothers with 2 cubs each. And there was even a little bit of, well, I say interaction. There was definitely a kind of a one group approaching towards the other group and looking very nervous, and the other group looking a bit nervous. And then eventually they sort of went their separate ways, but absolutely wonderful. I said I would come back to Tallinn right at the end. The very last day when we got our flight home, the flight's not till the till sort of afternoon really. So we do have a bit of time in the morning to have a quick look at Tallinn. And Tallinn has a kind of an upper part of the city and a lower part of the city. So if you start in the upper part, you can walk around there with some very nice looking buildings and history and whatever. And you can come to this viewpoint where you look out over the town. The lower picture there shows the lower part of the town where we can have a little look in the centre, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a nice place to look around. But what also made it for me was that since I was last there, Tallinn has gone a similar way to Berlin in that these things are now starting to appear. I'm not claiming that photograph was taken with that goshawk in it. I've obviously photoshopped it in sneakily. However, that's what we saw. We actually had a goshawk circling around right in front of us over the city. And apparently there are several pairs now in the parks and cemeteries and things in the middle of town even, which is quite remarkable. And very similar to Berlin, apparently. Berlin has also city nesting goshawks. So a real treat. Very, very nice way to finish the trip. Nice look around the town, but with a goshawk circling over our heads. Absolutely wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching. And if you've got any questions, obviously I'll be very happy to answer them.